6 years is a long time to be told you are a thief by your own family. It is long enough to start wondering, in the very late hours of certain nights, if maybe they are right and you have been lying to yourself the whole time. It is long enough to forget the sound of your own mother's voice on the phone because she stopped calling you when you were 23, and now you are 29, and you have built an entire adult life inside the silence. My grandmother died on a Tuesday in February. Her name was Hattie Pemberton. She was 81 years old. She had been my favorite person on the planet from the time I was old enough to remember faces, and the last 6 years of her life had been the worst years of mine, because my own family had spent those years telling everybody in our small town, including her, that I had been stealing from her. I had not been stealing from her. I want you to know that before I tell you anything else. My grandmother had not believed it either. I want you to know that too. But by the time I had figured out that she had not believed it, she had been dead for 9 days, and I was sitting at her old kitchen table with a lawyer I had only met once, and he was sliding an envelope across the kitchen table toward me, and what was inside that envelope was about to take 6 years of my own family's lies and set them on fire in a way I had not seen coming. My name is Marisol Pemberton. I am a hospice nurse. I have spent the last 4 years sitting at the bedsides of dying people, holding their hands when they could not hold a phone anymore, helping them say goodbye to the people they loved. I am very good at my job. The irony of my career is not lost on me. The accusation my family had been carrying about me for 6 years was that I had been stealing from an elderly woman. The actual life I had been living, while they were telling that story about me, was a life devoted entirely to caring for elderly women who were dying, but that part comes later. Let me start at the kitchen table. Before I do, hit subscribe, and tell me one thing in the comments. Tell me about a time somebody assumed the worst possible thing about you, before they had any evidence, and what it cost you to live inside that assumption while you waited for the truth to arrive. I read every single comment, even the long ones, especially the long ones. Now let me take you back to the day everything started. I want to tell you about my grandmother first, because the rest of this story is just the shadow she cast. Hattie Pemberton was born in a small town in Tennessee in 1942. She moved north when she was 20, married my grandfather 2 years later, and spent the next 58 years living in the same yellow house on a quiet street in Pennsylvania. She had 3 children. My father, Wendell, was the youngest. She raised them inside that yellow house, and after my grandfather died when I was 11, she stayed in it alone. She refused to move into anything smaller. She said the house remembered her, and she did not have the energy to teach a new house who she was. I had spent every summer of my childhood at that yellow house. My older sister, Calista, had not. Calista had been a city kid, always. She had not liked Pennsylvania. She had not liked the quiet. She had not liked the way our grandmother served dinner at 6 in the evening every single day, no matter what, with the same 3 pieces of china she had inherited from her own mother. By the time we were teenagers, Calista was visiting our grandmother twice a year, on Christmas and on her birthday, and only because our parents made her. I was driving up every other weekend. When I was 19, I started nursing school. I had decided, around the age of 15, sitting on my grandmother's porch with her in the late afternoon while she napped in her chair next to me, that what I wanted to do with my life was take care of people who were old. My family had not approved of the choice. My father had said nursing was beneath a Pemberton, although I do not know what exactly a Pemberton was supposed to be doing instead. My mother had said it was unstable work. My sister had said, with the particular cruelty of an older sister, that I was choosing nursing because I had no other options. I had let them say what they wanted. I had gone to school anyway. I was 23 years old when my sister told my parents I had been stealing from our grandmother. It happened in October. My grandmother had called my mother in tears the day before. She had told my mother that some of her things were missing. A pearl bracelet that had belonged to her mother. A small jewelry box. 3 pieces of antique silver from a set my grandfather had bought her on their 10th anniversary. She had been noticing things missing for several months, but she had not wanted to say anything, because she had thought she was just losing track of where she had put them. She had finally decided that day that the items had been gone too long to be misplaced. Somebody had been taking them. My mother had told my father had told my sister. My sister had said very quickly, with what later seemed like rehearsed confidence, that she knew exactly who had been doing it. She had said it had been me. She had said she had noticed me acting strangely the last few times I had visited my grandmother. She had said she had once seen me with a pearl bracelet I had been suspicious about. She had said she had not wanted to say anything because she had been hoping she was wrong, but if our grandmother was now noticing things missing, she had to speak up. My parents had believed her. They had not called me. They had not asked me about it. They had gone directly to my grandmother and told her that they were sorry, but it was me. They had told her not to confront me. They had told her they would handle it. They had told her to change the locks on her doors, which my grandmother had done that very afternoon, with a locksmith my mother had called. I had found out about it 3 weeks later, when I had driven up for my regular weekend visit and discovered that my key did not work. I had stood on my grandmother's porch ringing the doorbell for almost 10 minutes. She had not come to the door. I had walked around to the side and looked through the kitchen window. She had been sitting at the kitchen table. She had been crying. She had not gotten up. I had driven home in a state of shock. I had called my mother. My mother had been the one to tell me. She had told me on the phone. She had not asked me if it was true. She had told me that the family had decided that I would no longer be welcome at family events. She had told me that my father did not want to speak to me. She had told me that my sister had been very brave to come forward. She had told me, finally, that I was not to contact my grandmother again because the doctor had said the stress was bad for her heart. I had asked my mother one question. I had asked her if she had asked me whether it was true. She had said no. She had said the evidence was already overwhelming. She had said my sister had been very specific. I had hung up the phone. I had sat in my apartment. I had not cried. I had not eaten. I had simply sat on the floor of my small living room, in the middle of the afternoon, for about 4 hours, while the light moved across the wall and turned orange and then disappeared. I had thought during those 4 hours about my grandmother. I had thought about what it would do to her in the last years of her life to believe that her favorite grandchild had been stealing from her. I had thought about whether she did believe it. I had thought about how I was going to convince her she was wrong. I had decided by the time the room had gone fully dark that I was not going to fight it. I want you to understand why. The decision is the entire seed of how I lived for the next 6 years. I had decided not to fight it because I had understood, sitting on that floor, that fighting it was going to make it worse. My family had already made up their minds. My grandmother had been told the story by the only people she trusted. The locks had already been changed. If I had driven up to her house with a long, impassioned defense, I would have looked to her exactly like a thief who had been caught and was trying to talk her out of believing the truth. The harder I argued, the more guilty I would have looked. My sister had structured the accusation perfectly. The accusation had been designed to be unfightable, so I had decided that I was going to live, instead, the kind of life a thief would not be capable of living. I was going to finish nursing school. I was going to pay my own way. I was going to take a job in hospice care because hospice care is the slowest and most demanding kind of work in the elderly care field, and you cannot fake your way through it. I was going to build a life so thoroughly clean, so verifiably devoted to the well-being of old people, that one day somebody who was still listening would notice the contradiction between the woman my family was describing and the woman who actually existed. I had not known if my grandmother would ever notice. I had not known if she would live long enough. I had not known if she would care enough. What I had known, on the floor of that small living room, was that the only thing I could control was the shape of my own days. I finished nursing school the next year. I took a job at a small hospice center in a town an hour away from my parents' city. I rented an apartment over a bakery. I bought a used car. I started working 12-hour shifts. I ate dinner at 6. I read books. I made one good friend at the hospice, a woman named Adeze Mensah, who had emigrated from Nigeria when she was 20 and who had become, over 4 years, the closest thing I had to a sister. We carpooled. We had Sunday dinners at her apartment. She knew the whole story. She was the only person, besides me, who knew the whole story. I did not call my parents. They did not call me. I did not contact my grandmother. I did not know how. The locks had been changed. The phone calls had stopped. My grandmother had been told a story about me that she had no way of testing against my actual life, because my actual life was an hour away and nobody was telling her about it. I sent her a card every birthday. I sent her a card every Christmas. I did not write much in the cards. I wrote simply, "I love you, Grandma. Thinking of you, Marisol." I did not know if she was reading them. I did not know if my mother was intercepting them. I sent them anyway. 6 years of birthday cards, 6 years of Christmas cards. I never got one back. When my grandmother died, I found out from a cousin, not from my parents. My cousin Patrice texted me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. The text said, "Marisol, Grandma passed last night. I am so sorry. I do not know if anybody told you. I thought you should hear it from somebody. The funeral is on Saturday." I had not been invited to the funeral. I had assumed I would not be. I went anyway. I sat in the back of the church. I did not speak to anybody. My parents saw me. They did not look at me directly. My sister did not look at me at all. After the service, I walked up to the casket. I stood there for about a minute. I told my grandmother I was sorry, even though I had nothing to be sorry for, because that is the kind of thing you say to your grandmother in a casket when you have been kept away from her for 6 years. I left the church before the burial. I drove home. I did not cry until I got into my apartment, and then I cried for about 3 hours, and then I went to bed, and then I went to work the next morning at 6, and I held the hand of an 84-year-old woman named Mrs. Kowalski while she died, and I cried again at work, but I did not tell anybody why. 9 days after my grandmother's funeral, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer named Reuben Sterling. The letter was short. It told me my grandmother had named me as a beneficiary in her will. It told me that my presence was required at the will reading. It told me that my grandmother had specifically requested that the will reading take place at her own kitchen table, in her own house, on a date he had selected. It told me that the date was the following Saturday at 1 in the afternoon. It told me that I was to come alone. I read the letter 4 times. I had never heard of Reuben Sterling. I called Adeze. I told her about it. She told me she would drive me to the house and wait outside in the car if I wanted. I told her yes. The Saturday of the will reading was an unusually warm February day. The snow had melted off the porch. The yellow house looked exactly the way it had looked the last time I had seen it from the kitchen window. Adeze parked in the driveway. I told her I would text her when I needed her. I walked up the porch steps. I rang the doorbell. Mr. Sterling answered. He was an older man, maybe 70, with white hair and a careful way of looking at people. He shook my hand. He told me my parents and my sister had already arrived. He told me my grandmother had been very specific that the reading take place in the kitchen, at the kitchen table, with the 4 of us seated in the same 4 chairs we had always sat in for family dinners. He asked me if I was prepared for that. I told him yes. I had been preparing for some version of that moment for 6 years. I walked into the kitchen. My parents were sitting at the table. My sister was sitting at the table. My grandmother's empty chair was at the head, the way it had always been. The other 3 chairs were full. There was 1 empty chair left. It was my chair, the chair I had sat in for every family dinner of my childhood, until I had stopped being invited. I sat down. Nobody spoke. My mother looked like she had not slept. My father was staring at his hands. My sister was looking out the window. Mr. Sterling sat down at the head of the table, in my grandmother's chair, with a folder. He opened the folder. Hattie Pemberton was my friend for 41 years, he said. I want all 4 of you to know that before we begin. I was not just her lawyer, I was her friend. She trusted me with the things in this folder. She also trusted me with how this meeting was going to be conducted. I am going to do my job the way she asked me to do it. I would appreciate your patience. He read the will first. The will was simple. The yellow house was to be sold, and the proceeds split into 3 equal portions among my father, my aunt, and my uncle. Her car was to be donated. Her clothing was to be donated. Her furniture was to be auctioned, with the proceeds going to a hospice charity she had named specifically. The piece of antique silver that had survived the year of items going missing was to be given to my father, with instructions to display it in his home. There was nothing in the will for my sister. There was nothing in the will for me. My sister's smile, which had been small but visible since I had walked in, started to grow. I saw it happen. She thought she had won. She thought my grandmother had cut me out. Then Mr. Sterling reached into his folder and pulled out an envelope. The envelope was thick. It had my name on it. Just my name. Marisol. Written in my grandmother's handwriting, which I had not seen in 6 years, and which I would have recognized anywhere, the way you recognize the voice of a person who taught you what kindness sounds like. Mr. Sterling slid the envelope across the table to me. This is for you, Marisol, he said. Your grandmother asked me to give this to you in front of your family. She did not ask me to read it aloud. She did not ask you to share it. She asked only that you receive it here, in this kitchen, with these 3 people in the room. Whatever you do with it after that is your decision. My sister's smile vanished. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy. There was something in it besides paper. I could feel a small, hard rectangle through the envelope, like a small notebook. My mother said, Marisol, what is that? Mom, I said, I do not know yet. Mr. Sterling, my father said, what is in that envelope? Wendell, Mr. Sterling said, Your mother's instructions to me were that the envelope is for Marisol. She is welcome to share it with you if she chooses. She is also welcome not to. I am not going to discuss the contents. My sister said, "This is ridiculous. We have a right to know what she is leaving." "Calista," Mr. Sterling said, "your grandmother left you nothing. She also left Marisol nothing in the will, in the legal sense. The envelope is not part of the estate. It is a personal letter. You have no legal claim to its contents." I held the envelope in my hands. I had a decision to make. I could open it at the table. I could open it later, alone. I had thought, walking up to the porch, that whatever happened in this meeting was going to happen quickly. I had not expected to be sitting at the table holding an envelope from my grandmother, with my family around me, deciding what to do with it. I made my decision. I told Mr. Sterling I would take it home. I would read it that night. I would decide tomorrow whether to share what was inside. My mother said, "Marisol, if she has left you something, if she has explained anything, you owe us. You owe us the chance to." "Mom," I said, "we are not having this conversation here." I stood up. I shook Mr. Sterling's hand. I walked out of the kitchen. I walked through the living room I had grown up in, past the chair my grandfather had read his newspaper in, past the small table where my grandmother had kept her sewing basket. I walked out the front door. I got into Adaise's car. She did not ask me anything. She just put the car in gear. She drove me home. I sat at my own small kitchen table that night, with the envelope in front of me, for almost 2 hours before I opened it. I knew somehow that what was inside it was going to change the rest of my life. I wanted to take a moment, before that happened, to remember what my life had been like before the change. The 6 years of silence, the hospice work, the small apartment, the Sunday dinners with Adaise, the 84-year-old women holding my hand. I wanted to honor that life briefly, before I let whatever was inside the envelope make it different. Then I opened it. There was a letter 6 pages long in my grandmother's handwriting. There was a small leather notebook, the kind people use to record their daily expenses, with a brown cover and a small elastic band around it. There was a key on a small ring with a tag that said, "Side Door." I read the letter first. The letter began this way. "My darling Marisol, I want you to know that I have been writing this letter for almost 2 years. I have been writing it slowly. I have been writing it because I have known, slowly, what it was going to have to say, and I have not wanted to say it, but I have also not wanted to leave you in the dark when I was gone. I am sorry for what is in this envelope. I am also not sorry because the truth is the only thing left that I can give you." I read the rest of the letter slowly. I want to tell you what was in it. My grandmother had begun to suspect, about 3 years before her death, that things were missing from her house. She had not believed at first that anybody was taking them. She had thought she was losing them. She had kept track for a year. She had written down every item she could not find. The list had gotten too long to be coincidence. She had started to investigate. She had not investigated openly. She had decided early on that whoever was taking from her was somebody she trusted, because she had not let many people into her house. She had wanted to know who it was, but she had also known that confronting the person directly would give them the chance to deny it, to lie, to redirect. So she had become, in the last 2 years of her life, a very careful and very quiet investigator of her own family. She had bought a small notebook, the same notebook that was in the envelope. She had kept it hidden in the drawer of her bedside table. She had used it to record every visit anybody paid her, the date, the time, who had been there, what rooms they had been in, what items had gone missing afterward. She had cross-referenced. She had built a pattern. The pattern had pointed very clearly to my sister Calista. Calista had been visiting my grandmother more often in the last few years than she had in the previous decade. The visits had not been social. They had been brief. They had been timed, my grandmother had noted, to the periods when my parents were out of town, and when my grandmother was likely to be alone. My sister had been showing up at odd hours. She had been excusing herself to the bathroom and staying away for long stretches. She had been making conversation about my grandmother's jewelry, asking what each piece had cost, asking which pieces were the oldest. My grandmother had noticed all of it. She had written all of it down. My sister had been the one stealing. Then my grandmother had received the call from my mother, in October of the year before, telling her that I had been the thief. My grandmother had been quiet. She had agreed to change the locks. She had agreed not to confront me. She had agreed to let my parents handle it. What she had not done was believe a word of it. She had written in the notebook, the day after that call, "Wendell told me today that Marisol has been stealing from me. This is not true. I know it is not true because Marisol has not been alone in any room of this house in over a year. Calista has. Calista has been alone in my bedroom 3 times in the last 6 months. Items have gone missing each time. I am not going to tell Wendell. I am going to wait. I want to know what they are doing. I want to know if they really believe it or if Calista is using me to hurt her sister." My grandmother had spent the next 6 years watching. She had been gentle to my sister when she visited. She had let my sister continue to take the smaller items because she had decided, around year 4, that the missing items were not the point. She had stopped the locks from being changed back because she had decided I would be safer if I stayed away. She had done all of this carefully. She had told my parents exactly what they wanted to hear while writing the truth every week in a notebook nobody else knew existed. The letter went on. My grandmother explained that she had not contacted me directly during the 6 years because she had wanted to test something. She had wanted to see what I would do. She had wanted to see whether I would fight, whether I would beg, whether I would manipulate her into believing me. She had assumed, based on knowing me my whole life, that I would do none of those things. She had been right. She had received my birthday cards. She had received my Christmas cards. She had kept every one of them in a drawer in her bedside table. She had kept the cards as evidence. She had decided from very early on that if she lived long enough, she was going to set the record straight at her own funeral, in the only way that could not be argued with. The letter ended this way. "Marisol, the notebook is yours. The key opens the side door of my house. You do not need to break in. The house was always yours in the way that mattered. I am not in the house anymore, but the house knows you. The notebook will tell your family the truth, in my own handwriting, in my own words. It is the only inheritance I am leaving you because it is the only one that is worth anything. The pearl bracelet, the silver, the small jewelry box, none of it ever mattered. Your name mattered. I am giving you back your name. Use it however you want. Do not take Calista to court. I do not want her prosecuted. I want her to live with knowing I knew. I want my real granddaughter to walk through her life with her name back. That is what I am leaving you. I love you. I have always loved you. I am sorry I waited so long." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I did not cry. I had cried at the funeral. I had cried in my apartment afterward. I had run out of crying for the year. What I felt, sitting there with the notebook in my hands, was something quieter. It was the slow rearrangement of 6 years of grief into something that finally had a shape. I called my mother the next morning. I told her I needed to come over. I told her I needed all of them there. My father, my sister. I told her I had something to share. I told her, when she pressed me, that my grandmother had left me a letter, and that I had decided to share what was in it, but I would only share it once, in person, with all 3 of them in the same room. My mother agreed. They were all going to be there at noon. I drove over with the notebook and the letter. Adeze drove behind me in her own car. She had told me that morning that she was going to wait in the driveway until I came out, and that she did not care how long it took. I told her I appreciated it. I walked into my parents' house. My sister was sitting on the couch. My father was standing by the window. My mother was in the doorway of the kitchen. I sat down in the armchair. I put the notebook and the letter on the coffee table. I read the letter aloud, the whole thing, 6 pages. When I was done, I opened the notebook. I read 3 of the entries aloud. I picked specific dates. The day my sister had taken the pearl bracelet. The day she had taken the small jewelry box. The day my mother had called my grandmother to tell her I had been the thief, and the entry my grandmother had written that night. The room was completely silent when I finished. My sister said, "She is lying." "Calista," I said, "stop. The notebook is in her handwriting. She kept it for 2 years. She kept the cards I sent her. They are in her bedside table. Mr. Sterling can confirm everything I have just told you. The truth has been waiting in that house the whole time. You can call him. You can read the notebook for yourself. You can do whatever you want. But you are not going to lie about it in front of me ever again." My mother had her hand over her mouth. My father had not moved from the window. My father said, "Calista, did you do this?" My sister did not answer. She got up. She walked out of the room. She did not come back. My mother said, "Marisol, I do not know what to say. We did not know." "Mom," I said, "I know you did not know. But you also did not ask. That is the whole problem. For 6 years, you did not ask. You took your daughter's word for something terrible about your other daughter, without ever once asking your other daughter for her side. I am going to need you to understand the difference. I am not going to be able to forgive you on the same timeline as you decide to be sorry. I do not know how long my timeline is. I do not even know if I have one. But I want you to know what I needed from you for 6 years and did not get, and I want you to know that the reason it did not happen is not because Calista lied. People lie all the time. The reason it did not happen is because you chose to believe a story that fit something you already wanted to believe about me. You took her word because you had been ready, your whole life, to be willing to believe the worst of me. That is the part I am going to need to understand before I am able to come back into this house. The lying is Callista's problem. The believing is yours. My father turned around from the window. He said, "Marisol, I am sorry." "Dad," I said, "I appreciate that. I am going to need a long time." I left the house. I drove home. Adeze followed me. We sat at my kitchen table that night and we did not say much. She made me dinner. She left around 10. I went to bed. It has been almost 2 years since that conversation. My sister moved out of the country 6 months after the conversation. She is somewhere in Europe now. I do not know where. She has not contacted me. I do not need her to. The story she told about me ended on the day I read the notebook aloud, and the version of her that needed to keep telling that story has run out of an audience. My parents have been trying. My mother calls me once a month now. We talk for about 20 minutes. We talk about her garden. We talk about my work at the hospice. We do not talk about Calista. My father has not called me on the phone yet, but he has written me 3 letters. The third one was an apology that was more honest than anything he had ever said to me out loud. I keep his letters in a drawer. I bought my grandmother's house, the yellow one. Mr. Sterling helped me work it out with the rest of the family. I paid them their share of the proceeds. I moved in last spring. I am writing this from her kitchen table. The same chair I had sat in for the will reading. The same chair I had sat in for every family dinner of my childhood. The house is mine now. The house was always mine in the way that mattered. I am sitting in it, watching the light move across the floor the way it used to move when I was 8 years old. I want to tell you what I have learned because I think you may need to hear it. There is a particular kind of lie that destroys you faster than almost any other kind. It is the lie of being called a thief, especially a thief of an old person. The reason that lie is so devastating is because it takes from you the one thing every person needs to survive in the world. It takes away the assumption of decency. Most people walk through their lives being assumed to be decent until they prove otherwise. When somebody calls you a thief of an elderly woman, that assumption is reversed. From that moment on, you are required to prove your decency, every day, in every interaction, to every person who has heard the story. The proof is impossible. There is no document you can produce. There is no statement you can give. The story is in the air, and the air is the thing you breathe. What you can do, if somebody ever does this to you, is what I did. You can decide that you are not going to fight the story. You are going to live, instead, the kind of life a person who deserves the story could not live. You are going to do the slow, daily work of being the opposite of what they have called you. You are going to do it for years if you have to. You are going to do it without an audience. You are going to do it because the only way the truth ever arrives is by you keeping the door open for it. The truth in my case was hidden in a small leather notebook in my grandmother's bedside table for 6 years. It was waiting. It was being collected. I did not know it was there. I only knew that I had to keep being the person I would have been if my family had been listening. I had to be the person my grandmother could have recognized, even from a distance, even through a story she had been told that did not match the cards I was sending her every Christmas. She did recognize me. She recognized me from the cards. She recognized me from my silence. She recognized me from what I did not do. She kept track. She wrote it down. She left me the proof on her own kitchen table, in her own house, on a Saturday in February, in the chair I had been sitting in since I was a child. Some people in your life are paying attention. Most are not. The ones who are paying attention will notice, eventually, the difference between the story being told about you and the life you are actually living. They may not be able to say anything while they are alive. They may have to leave the truth for you in a small notebook. They may have to leave it for you in a letter that takes them 2 years to write. The form does not matter. What matters is that you live the kind of life that gives them something to record. If you live carefully enough, somebody, somewhere, is keeping a notebook on you that you do not know about. The notebook will arrive. You just have to be the person it can be written about honestly. I want to ask you something before you go. I asked you at the start of this video about a time somebody assumed the worst possible thing about you. I want to ask something more specific now. Tell me in the comments the moment you decided you were not going to fight the lie they were telling about you. Tell me what you decided to do instead. Tell me what you built while you were waiting for the truth to find its way back to you. Tell me what your version of the slow daily work has been. I want to know because I think a lot of us are doing this work right now, in different ways, in our own quiet corners. The work is not glamorous, it does not get applauded, but it is the only thing that ever actually changes the story in the end. Tell me yours. I will be reading every single comment. I will see you in the next one.